Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Missouri Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know which places and at what times of day or night these documented stories reach. The tale begins in Miller County, Missouri, 1893. Nestled deep within the Ozark Mountains, away from the growing railroads and bustling river ports that were modernizing the state, stood a farmhouse that locals would eventually come to avoid entirely. The Holloway family had lived on that same plot of land since before the Civil War, their weathered two-story home perched on a rocky outcropping overlooking the Osage River Valley. The location was both strategic and isolated, offering clear views of approaching travelers while remaining sheltered from prying eyes by dense oak and hickory, forests that shrouded the property for most of the year. What makes this case particularly disturbing isn't just the disappearances that would later be attributed to the property, but the meticulous documentation that survived, contrary to what one might expect from such a remote location in that era. County records, church registries, and a collection of personal correspondence discovered in 1964 during renovations to the Miller County Courthouse provide a disturbing window into events that local authorities seemingly wanted forgotten. The Holloways were not native to the Ozarks. According to immigration records from 1851, Thomas Holloway arrived from northern England, listing his occupation as butcher and meat preserver. He initially settled in St. Louis, where city directories show he operated a small but reputable meat market on the city's north side. It was there he met Martha Keller, the daughter of German immigrants who owned a boarding house where Thomas took lodging. They married in 1853, as recorded in the registry of the Third Presbyterian Church of St. Louis. What prompted their move to the isolated Ozark region remains unclear. Land purchase records indicate Thomas acquired the Miller County property in 1857 for a sum considerably below market value. The previous owner, a Jonathan Mercer, had abandoned the property suddenly, according to local accounts preserved in the Hawk Point Historical Society archives. Mercer reportedly left behind most possessions, including livestock, departing after what neighbors described as a disagreement over dinner arrangements with his wife. No further record of the Mercers exists in Missouri archives. Thomas and Martha Holloway were known throughout the region for their hospitality, a not uncommon virtue in the isolated communities of the Ozarks, where travelers often needed shelter. Their farm sat along what was then called the Jefferson Trail, a rough path connecting Jefferson City to Springfield. The route was frequently traveled by merchants, peddlers, and those seeking land further west. What made the Holloways' reputation particularly notable was their standing invitation to travelers. Any passerby was welcome to supper and lodging in exchange for news from beyond their isolated valley. By all accounts preserved in local records, the Holloways appeared to be model citizens during their early years in Miller County. Thomas served briefly as a county commissioner from 1860 to 1861, resigning when the Civil War began. Though Missouri's population was deeply divided during the conflict, the Holloways maintained strict neutrality, providing meals and shelter to soldiers from both sides, according to military pension records, where veterans later listed the farm as a place they had received aid. According to tax records from 1890, the Holloway property consisted of 80 acres, a main house with 6 rooms, a large barn, smokehouse, and root cellar. The property was valued considerably higher than neighboring farms, suggesting prosperity unusual for the region. Their nearest neighbors, the Wilsons, lived approximately 3 miles to the east, while the small settlement of Hawk Point lay about 7 miles to the southwest. This isolation, while not unusual for the region, would later prove significant. Church attendance records from the Hawk Point Methodist congregation note that Martha Holloway faithfully attended services until the spring of 1893, when her absences became frequent, then permanent. When questioned by the pastor, Reverend Isaiah Fleming, Thomas Holloway explained that his wife had developed nervous complaints that made travel difficult. This explanation was accepted without much question. The rugged terrain made regular church attendance challenging for many. What was not recorded in the church registry, but later emerged in Reverend Fleming's personal journal, discovered during a 1962 renovation of the church parsonage, was his growing concern about Martha's condition. His entry from March 12, 1883 notes, "Mrs. Holloway's absence continues. Visited farm today to offer pastoral comfort. Thomas refused entry to house, speaking to me only on the porch. When I inquired after Martha's health, he replied she was adapting to new circumstances. Heard movement from upper floor, but saw no one. Thomas declined prayer, saying they had found their own comfort, left feeling troubled in spirit." The first documented concern from outside the church appears in a letter dated April 17, 1893, written by Jeremiah Wilson to his brother in St. Louis. The letter, preserved in the Wilson family Bible discovered during a 1953 estate sale, mentions, "Our neighbors the Holloways have grown peculiar of late. Thomas has built a new smokehouse, larger than most in these parts. Martha no longer visits or accepts visitors, though they still take in travelers. Thomas has been buying unusual quantities of salt and preserving supplies in town. When questioned, he speaks of a bountiful hunting season ahead. Yet I have seen no increase in game being brought back to the property, despite his daily expeditions into the forest. Most curious are the improvements to their cellar, deeper excavations that continue even now. Thomas employs no help in this work, though the scope suggests need of assistance. This period coincides with what local merchants would later identify as a change in Thomas Holloway's purchasing patterns. The ledger from Henderson's General Store in Hawk Point, preserved in the County Historical Archives, shows Thomas's regular orders shifting in February 1893. Where he had previously purchased typical household supplies, he now ordered industrial quantities of salt, alum, various chemical preservatives, new barrels, specialized knives, and unusual amounts of quicklime. When questioned by the shopkeeper, Thomas explained he was experimenting with new preservation methods learned from European journals. What happened next was pieced together through a variety of sources, including a journal kept by Dr. Samuel Graves, the only physician serving the southeastern portion of Miller County. In his entry from May 29, 1893, he notes being called to the Holloway farm to treat Thomas for a deep laceration to his right forearm. Patient claimed injury from butchering accident. Wound inconsistent with typical slaughtering implements, jagged, with unusual angles suggesting defensive nature rather than occupational mishap. Noticed unusual odor in home, similar to tannery but with underlying sweetness that prompted nausea. Patient anxious to expedite my departure, declined recommended sutures, accepting only antiseptic powder and bandaging. The doctor's journal continues with a troubling observation. Mrs. Holloway not seen during visit, though heard moving in upper rooms. Thomas explained she was resting. Basement door secured with new padlock of unusual size. Multiple flies present despite cool weather. Thomas had installed new oilcloth on all floors, unusual expense for farmhouse. Noticed dark staining beneath edges where cloth did not quite meet wall. When I remarked upon it, Thomas stated recent wine spill had damaged original flooring. No viniculture observed on property to substantiate explanation. Dr. Graves concludes his entry with a personal note. Something amiss in Holloway household. Considered reporting concerns to Sheriff Hartley, but lacks substantive evidence of wrongdoing. Will make point to inquire after Martha's health with church ladies who may have more direct knowledge of household conditions. No follow-up entry appears in the doctor's journal. According to county death records, Dr. Graves himself died unexpectedly on June 4, 1893, less than a week after his visit to the Holloway farm. The cause listed was apoplexy brought on by cardiac irregularity, a common notation for sudden death in that era. No autopsy was performed, as was typical for rural areas at that time. His replacement, Dr. William Porter, arrived from St. Louis in late July and had no prior knowledge of the Holloway situation. Throughout that summer, at least 6 traveling salesmen registered their intended routes with mercantile owners in Jefferson City. listing the Holloway farm as a planned overnight stop. None ever reported back to their companies. At the time, this raised minimal concern. The transient nature of such work and the difficult terrain meant that itinerary changes were common. Only in retrospect did these disappearances form a pattern. The mercantile records, preserved in the State Historical Archives, show these travelers included Jonathan Beck, representing Collier's Farm Implements; Frederick Miller, a watch and clock repair specialist; Henry Dubois, selling patent medicines; Samuel Cohen, a fabric and notion salesman; Robert Jenkins, representing Singer Sewing Machines; and Michael O'Malley, a distributor of preserved foods and canned goods. Each had registered the Holloway farm as an anticipated stop between June and August 1893. The Hawk Point General Store ledger from this period shows Thomas Holloway's purchases changing further. Where he had previously bought typical farm supplies and household goods, his accounts now showed unusual quantities of quicklime, new bedding, women's clothing in various sizes, and what the shopkeeper noted as mechanical parts of unusual design. When questioned about these purchases, Thomas reportedly explained that Martha had taken to sewing for neighboring families and that he was constructing a new water pump system. An entry in the store ledger from July 27, 1893, contains a marginal note from the proprietor. T. Holloway purchased 6 new place settings of silverware today, third such purchase this summer. When remarked upon, he explained previous sets had disappeared. Also requested special order of chemical glassware from St. Louis supplier. Man's appearance deteriorating, clothing stained despite new purchases, odor noticeable. Hands raw as though from constant washing. In late August 1893, a land surveyor named Edward Collins stopped at the Holloway farm while mapping the region for a proposed railway extension. His field notebook, recovered from among his possessions when his horse returned riderless to Hawk Point, contains a curious entry. August 29, 1893. Invited to supper at Holloway farm. Unusual household. Host Thomas, most insistent I stay in East Room. Peculiar sounds from cellar. Mrs. H. appears unwell, speaks rarely, watches constantly. Food has strange quality, texture unfamiliar, though Thomas claims merely venison. Feel drowsy after meal. Suspect laudanum or similar. Martha warned me when Thomas briefly left room. Do not go below. Do not sleep deeply. Her manner desperate, yet resigned. A second entry, partially smudged but dated August 30th, reads, Woke disoriented. Effects of drugged meal lingering. Thomas insistent I rest another day. Claimed heavy rains would make travel difficult, though sky clear when glimpsed through window. Martha now locked in upstairs room. Thomas explains her episodes require isolation. Heard her weeping. Discovered unusual mechanism in bedroom wall, pipe system of some kind leading downward. Put ear to pipe, heard what sounded like multiple voices, though no other guests in house. Thomas discovered me listening, became agitated. Claimed old speaking tube from when children occupied house. No record or evidence of Holloway children found in any documentation. Must leave at first opportunity. This is the final entry in Collins's notebook. The subsequent investigation into his disappearance was cursory at best. The local sheriff, William Hartley, noted in his report that he visited the Holloway farm on September 4, 1893, finding nothing suspicious. Thomas Holloway reports surveyor left morning after arrival, heading southwest. No evidence to contrary observed. Property orderly, though Mrs. Holloway indisposed and did not receive visitors. What Sheriff Hartley failed to mention in his official report, but later confided to his deputy according to a sworn affidavit given in 1923, was that Martha Holloway's demeanor had changed dramatically. The once sociable woman now stood silently in the kitchen doorway throughout his visit, her eyes never leaving her husband as he spoke. The sheriff also noted that despite the warm September weather, a fire burned in the kitchen stove, and a large pot of what Thomas called bone broth simmered continuously. In his affidavit, given shortly before his death, former Deputy James Hendricks stated, Sheriff Hartley told me privately that during his September visit, he observed what appeared to be fresh grave digging in the north field. When questioned, Thomas Holloway explained he had been preparing ground for fall planting, though the disturbed area didn't follow typical farming patterns. The sheriff also noted that Martha Holloway appeared significantly thinner than her last church appearance, her complexion gray, eyes sunken. She spoke only once during the entire visit, saying to her husband, "They're growing restless below." Thomas quickly explained she referred to root vegetables stored in the cellar. The turning point came in early October 1893, when Jacob Turner, a Missouri Pacific Railroad agent, stopped at the farm seeking directions. Unlike previous visitors, Turner declined the offer of supper, explaining that he needed to reach Hawk Point before nightfall. His account, published in the Jefferson City Tribune on October 24, 1893, described something troubling. "As I prepared to leave, I noticed what appeared to be personal effects in a burn pile behind the barn. A valise, papers, what might have been a surveyor's case. When questioned about these items, Mr. Holloway became agitated, insisting I had been invited to supper and should stay. His wife appeared in the doorway then, her expression vacant, yet somehow imploring. I made my excuses and departed with haste." Turner's report continued with observations he made from the hillside overlooking the property as he rode away. Curiosity compelling me, I paused at a vantage point approximately half a mile distant and observed the farm through my field glass. Thomas Holloway emerged from the house carrying what appeared to be heavy tools, perhaps mining implements, and proceeded to the enlarged smokehouse structure. Most disturbing was the appearance of Martha Holloway at an upper window. She stood perfectly still, staring in my direction, though I cannot believe she could discern my position at such distance. As dusk fell, I observed lights not only in the main house, but appearing to emanate from the ground itself at several points across the property, suggesting subsurface constructions of some kind. Turner's report prompted a second, more thorough investigation of the property. Sheriff Hartley, accompanied by 4 deputies, arrived at the Holloway farm on October 26, 1893. According to the official report filed with the county clerk, the scene they encountered defied immediate explanation. The house appeared abandoned, though a meal lay half-eaten on the dining table. A pot of stew remained warm on the stove. The table was set for 3, though only one place setting showed signs of use. The cellar door, previously noted as padlocked, stood open. What they found below has been described in varying detail across several sources, but all agree on certain elements. The cellar had been expanded considerably, with tunnels extending beneath the barn and into the hillside. These spaces contained personal effects identified as belonging to at least 4 of the missing travelers. More disturbing were the modifications to the root cellar itself, which now contained what appeared to be a workshop with unusual implements, large preserving vats, and a complex drainage system that fed into the nearby creek. Deputy Hendricks's affidavit describes a system of pipes and speaking tubes connecting various underground chambers to the main house, particularly the dining room and kitchen areas. The official report contains only clinical descriptions of evidence suggesting processing of organic materials and implements of unusual design appearing to serve culinary and preservative functions. However, Deputy Hendricks's personal account is more explicit. The cellar complex contained what can only be described as a kitchen of horrors. Specialized cutting tables with drainage channels, smoking chambers, an elaborate preservation system using both salt and chemical solutions. Most disturbing were the detailed diagrams on the walls, showing human forms with butchery notations similar to those used for livestock. Martha Holloway was discovered in the main bedroom, seated before a mirror, seemingly unresponsive to the officer's presence. According to Deputy Hendricks's personal account, written years later for his grandson, she sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on her reflection, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When turned to face the sheriff, she simply continued staring straight ahead, as though looking through him to some point beyond. The only words she spoke were, "They're all at supper now." "The table is full at last?" When asked to clarify, she merely smiled and repeated, "Full at last. No empty chairs." Thomas Holloway was nowhere to be found on the property. A search of the surrounding area yielded no immediate results, though searchers noted unusual disturbances in the soil of the north field, as though something heavy had been dragged across it repeatedly. Deputy Hendricks's account notes that dogs brought to track Thomas's scent refused to enter certain areas of the property, particularly around the expanded smokehouse and the north field. Animals became distressed, whimpering and retreating despite handlers' commands. The officers removed Martha Holloway to the county jail, though she was never formally charged with any crime. Medical records from the Jefferson City Asylum, where she was transferred on November 3, 1893, describe her as catatonic with periods of extreme agitation occurring nightly between the hours of 6 and 7 o'clock traditional supper time. During these episodes, staff reported she would set imaginary places at her small table, serve invisible guests, and engage in one-sided conversations. She referred frequently to Thomas's special recipe and the guests below, but never provided coherent explanations when questioned. Dr. Harold Winters, the asylum's chief physician, noted in his case file, patient displays unusual eating habits, hoarding food in her room rather than consuming it. When food disappears overnight, she claims the guests have taken it. Most troubling is her insistence that she can hear multiple voices through the heating pipes in her room. Voices she claims are her dinner guests, engaged in ongoing conversation. She seems to believe these individuals, whom she refers to by names matching several missing persons from the Miller County region, continue to dine eternally in some space beneath her former home. Martha remained institutionalized until her death from pneumonia in 1897, never having provided any coherent account of what transpired at the farm. Asylum records indicate that in her final days, she became briefly lucid, requesting paper and pen. The single page she produced, preserved in the asylum archives until 1964, contained only a list of names, 12 in total, with notations beside each that appeared to be dates and weights. The final entry on the list was Thomas, October 17, 1893, 168 pounds. The document was signed Martha Holloway, hostess. Thomas Holloway remained missing until November 18, 1893, when a hunting party discovered human remains in a cave approximately 2 miles northwest of the property. The remains were identified as Holloway's through personal effects and dental records. The coroner's report indicates death by exsanguination from a severed femoral artery. The report notes, injury appears self-inflicted by sharp implement. Subject likely crawled considerable distance after injury, evidenced by blood trail extending deep into cave system. What the official report omits, but was recorded in Dr. Porter's private medical notes, discovered in 1967 among his effects, was the condition of Thomas Holloway's body. Corpse discovered in unusual state. Despite significant blood loss indicating recent death, portions of the body appear to have been surgically removed ante-mortem. Precision of excision suggests medical knowledge or butchery experience, most notably portions of thigh muscle, liver, and certain internal organs absent. Pattern consistent with selective removal, rather than animal predation or decomposition. Most disturbing was discovery of what appeared to be partially digested human tissue in subject's own stomach contents, suggesting anthropophagy. What followed was an intensive search of the Holloway property that continued, intermittently until December 1893. The findings were documented in a report so disturbing that county officials subsequently ordered all copies sealed. A single transcript survived, hidden within the personal effects of Deputy Hendricks, discovered by his family in 1958. According to this transcript, excavations of the North Field revealed human remains in various states of decomposition. Most disturbing were the modifications to the smokehouse, which contained evidence suggesting its use for purposes other than preserving game or livestock. The report describes specialized equipment of unknown purpose, extensive drainage systems, and what appeared to be a detailed ledger recording processing weights and yield calculations in Thomas Holloway's handwriting. The ledger, portions of which were transcribed in the report, contained entries dating back to 1887 suggesting the Holloways' activities predated the obvious changes in their behavior noted by neighbors in early 1893. Each entry included a name, physical description, date of arrival, and detailed notes on preparation methods and preservation techniques. The earliest entries describe experiments with traditional meat preservation applied to what the ledger euphemistically referred to as alternative stock. Later, entries become more explicit, with detailed notes on which cuts yielded best results and which specimens provided most satisfactory outcomes. Most disturbing was a notation system that rated guests' suitability based on their physical condition upon arrival and their profession. Traveling salesmen ranked highest, with a notation that those who sample many foods develop superior flavor profiles. The ledger included recipes, serving suggestions, and what appeared to be a rotation system, ensuring fresh preparation for nightly service. The final pages of the ledger, dated October 1893, showed increasing incoherence. Thomas's handwriting deteriorated, and entries began referencing the voices at the table and Martha's expanding guest list. The final entry, dated October 17th, the day before Jacob Turner's visit, read simply, "Table full now. Chairs all taken? They dine eternally below. Martha hears them through the pipes. I hear nothing yet. Perhaps I must join them to understand. One empty chair remains. The local newspaper reported only that improprieties had been discovered at the Holloway farm, and that all those who had been involved in the investigation had taken an oath of silence regarding specific details. This was explained as necessary to protect public sensibilities and prevent hysteria. The Jefferson City Tribune on December 2, 1893, mentioned only that certain disturbing discoveries had prompted authorities to permanently close the property, with a warning that those of nervous disposition are advised to avoid the area entirely. What was not publicly reported, but emerged in church records decades later, was Reverend Fleming's insistence on performing an exorcism of the property before its destruction. His personal journal, discovered during church renovations in 1962, describes the ritual performed on December 8, 1893. Completed the rites today at the Holloway place. Sheriff Hartley and deputies in attendance. All agreed the atmosphere of the place oppressive beyond natural explanation. During prayers, distinct sounds of cutlery against china emanated from below ground, though all structures had been emptied. Most troubling was the moment of silence following our final prayer, broken by what distinctly sounded like a dinner bell, followed by a woman's voice calling, "Supper is served." No woman present at the scene. In January 1894, county officials ordered the Holloway house burned to the ground. The barn and outbuildings were dismantled, and the property was left to return to wilderness. A resolution passed by the county commissioners declared the land unfit for habitation and prohibited its sale or development. The official reason given was soil contamination rendering the land unsuitable for agriculture or habitation, though no specific contaminant was identified in public records. For decades, the case remained largely forgotten outside of local folklore. Residents of Hawk Point and surrounding communities developed a tradition of avoiding the former Holloway property, particularly around dusk. Local tales spoke of travelers who, unfamiliar with the region's history, would sometimes camp on the land, only to report unusual sounds throughout the night, sounds described variously as machinery operating underground or distant dinner conversation. A local custom developed wherein residents would never extend dinner invitations to strangers passing through the area, instead directing them to public establishments only. This practice, still observed by older families in the region, was explained to newcomers simply as the way things are done here, when pressed. Elders would sometimes add cryptically that in these hills, a dinner invitation carries obligations best avoided. In 1925, a hunting party reported finding what appeared to be an outdoor table setting, complete with plates, silver, and serving dishes, arranged on the former Holloway property, despite the land having been abandoned for over 30 years. When a sheriff's deputy investigated the following day, no table setting was found, though depressions in the earth suggested recent placement of heavy objects. The incident was dismissed as a prank by local youth, though no one claimed responsibility. In 1964, during renovations to the Miller County Courthouse, workers discovered a sealed compartment within a wall of the records room. Inside was a metal box containing items removed from the Holloway farm, including several pages from what appeared to be Thomas Holloway's journal. These pages, dated from July to September 1893, contained disturbing entries that shed partial light on the case. One entry, dated July 18, 1893, reads, "M increasingly difficult to manage. Says the strangers speak to her after processing. Impossible, of course. Have moved her to upper room when visitors arrive. The travelers ask after her, but none suspect. Their curiosity ends at supper. The new preservation method proves superior, essence retained much longer. The voices M hears must be her imagination. Yet she describes conversations in such detail, including matters the travelers discussed with us at table before consumption of the special tea." A later entry from August 30th is more cryptic. "Collins proved troublesome, too observant by half, equipment functioning beyond expectation, yield exceptional. M refused to eat again today, though I explained the preparation contains nothing familiar to her. She watches me constantly now, even in sleep. Claims to hear them dining below at all hours. Says they discuss their travels, their homes left behind, their dismay at understanding their circumstances. Nonsense, of course. Once processed, consciousness ceases. The nutrients merely sustain us. Yet M insists they remain aware somehow, gathered at an eternal table. Her mind fractures, yet her new insights regarding preparation techniques prove unnervingly effective." The final entry, dated September 24, 1893, suggests Thomas Holloway's deteriorating mental state. M discovered the ledger. Her reaction unexpected, not horror, but fascination. She now assists willingly. Speaks of hearing them all gathered at table below. Says they converse, though I hear nothing. Perhaps she has always understood better than I the nature of true hospitality. We shall continue the work together now. She suggests we should join them eventually, says they have set places for us at the table. I explained we are the hosts, not the guests, but she merely smiled, said all must take their place at the table eventually. The new equipment arrives tomorrow. Larger capacity, special plateau aging room nearly complete beneath the north field. Soon we shall host the largest supper this county has ever known. Historians and criminologists who have studied the case suggest several theories. Some believe the Holloways were merely serial killers who targeted vulnerable travelers, while others point to evidence of ritualistic elements in their activities. The peculiar modifications to the farm buildings suggest a purpose beyond simple murder, though the exact nature of their intentions remains unclear. The discovery in 1967 of Thomas Holloway's original business records from his St. Louis butcher shop added another dimension to the case. These documents, found during demolition of the city's old market district, revealed that Thomas had been forced to close his business in 1857 following allegations of selling questionable meats to customers. While never formally charged, contemporary accounts in the St. Louis Dispatch suggested Holloway had been mixing human remains from a nearby potter's field with his standard offerings, a practice discovered when a medical student recognized what appeared to be a human finger in a prepared stew. Perhaps most disturbing is the account from Dr. Lawrence Peterson, who in 1968 gained permission to conduct a geological survey of the area. His report mentions discovering a previously unknown cave system extending beneath the former Holloway property. Inside, his team found evidence of recent human activity, a table and chairs arranged as if for a meal, though the site had been officially abandoned for 75 years. The table was set for 14 individuals, with one chair at the head, noticeably larger than the others. When they returned the following day with proper documentation equipment, the table setting had been disturbed, as though recently used, with food residue on several plates. Peterson's final field notes, submitted to the University of Missouri's Anthropology Department, but never published, include this observation. local time approximately 6:45 p.m. As light faded, distinct sounds emanated from deeper within the cave system. The audio recording equipment malfunctioned, but all team members report hearing what sounded like multiple voices engaged in dinner conversation, the clink of cutlery against plates, and a woman's voice repeatedly inviting someone to have a little more. The team evacuated immediately. Upon reaching the surface, one member noticed what appeared to be a handwritten invitation pinned to his backpack, though none recalled seeing it earlier. The note read simply, "Please join us for supper. Your place is waiting." The university subsequently denied Peterson's request for further funding to investigate the site. His audio equipment, examined by technicians, showed no mechanical failure, but contained no recordings from that evening. The handwritten invitation was submitted with his report but disappeared from university archives sometime before 1969. The property today remains undeveloped, marked on modern maps simply as restricted federal land. The official explanation cites environmental concerns related to the cave system, though no specific ecological studies are referenced in public records. Locals refer to the area simply as the Hollow Place, or sometimes Supper Ground, and maintain a tradition of leaving food offerings at crossroads near the property on the anniversary of Thomas Holloway's death. AI's practice they explain as keeping them fed below so they don't come looking. In 1969, the last known attempt to investigate the Holloway case was abandoned when researcher Margaret Klein, after spending 3 weeks examining the assembled evidence, abruptly destroyed her notes and refused to continue. Her only explanation, noted in a letter to her department chair, was, "Some invitations should remain declined. Some suppers should remain uneaten. The Holloways are still waiting for guests, and I will not be among them. The voices in the pipes are not imaginary. I heard them clearly in the recordings thought to be blank. They are discussing me by name. They know I'm listening." Professor Klein subsequently resigned her position and reportedly moved to Arizona, refusing all further contact with colleagues or requests for interviews regarding the case. Her letter, preserved in university archives, concludes with a cryptic postscript. "They claim to be setting places for us all eventually. Every guest who ever declined their hospitality remains on the invitation list. Martha serves, Thomas carves. The others eat eternally, aware of their condition, but unable to leave the table. Look at the dates of disappearances in the region since 1857. Not just the 6 traveling salesmen in 1893, but dozens more throughout the decades. All connected to the property, all missing after declining supper invitations. The pattern continues even now. The caves have since been sealed by order of the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, the stated reason being public safety concerns. Local residents still avoid the area after dark, and there persists a custom in nearby communities of never extending dinner invitations to strangers passing through, a tradition whose origins many younger residents no longer recall, but one that older families maintain with unwavering conviction. Those who hike the Ozark trails near the former Holloway property occasionally report the distant smell of cooking food where no campsite exists, and the sound of a woman's voice calling travelers to supper. Park rangers dismiss these accounts as the product of overactive imaginations influenced by local folklore, though internal reports show that ranger patrols avoid the area during the evening hours. According to an internal Park Service memo from 1972, discovered during a Freedom of Information request in 1968, rangers are instructed to discourage overnight camping within a 3-mile radius of the unmarked site and to respond to all reports of cooking odors or sounds of conversation in uninhabited areas with full personnel, and never as a single responder. The memo further notes that any visitor reporting receipt of written or verbal dinner invitations while in the restricted zone should be immediately evacuated and debriefed according to Protocol H7. The most recent documented incident occurred in 1964 when a family of 4 disappeared while camping in the region. Their vehicle was discovered parked at a trailhead approximately 1 mile from the former Holloway property. Among their recovered possessions was a hand-drawn map with the annotation, Local recommended this site for overnight stay. Says best view of valley from old foundation. The investigation concluded with the family presumed lost in the extensive cave systems, their bodies never recovered. The local who reportedly gave them directions was never identified, though several witnesses described seeing an elderly couple in outdated clothing speaking with the family at a gas station in Hawk Point earlier that day. The female was reported to have repeatedly mentioned that supper would be waiting for them at the recommended site. What makes this incident particularly disturbing is the discovery during the investigation of a journal belonging to the family's teenage son. The final entry, dated the day of their disappearance, reads, "Setting up camp near some old ruins. Dad says it was once a farmhouse. Found a weird old table in the woods nearby, all set for dinner with ancient-looking plates and silverware. Mom wanted to leave, but the older couple who told us about this place showed up again. They're building a fire now, and the woman is cooking something that smells amazing. Said they're caretakers of the old property and often prepare meals for hikers. The woman, Martha, I think she said, keeps saying how happy she is to have us for dinner. Something odd about how she phrases it. The man doesn't talk much, just keeps sharpening his knives. Dinner in an hour." Perhaps the final word on the Holloway case comes from the last entry in Deputy Hendrick's personal account, written shortly before his death in 1945. "I have never spoken of what we found beneath that house, nor what was written in Thomas Holloway's complete ledger before the sheriff burned it. I will take that knowledge to my grave. But this I will say, there are hungers that food cannot satisfy, appetites that transcend mere consumption. The Holloways discovered something primal about hospitality, about inviting strangers to your table. And though the house is gone, I believe their table remains set, somewhere in the darkness beneath those hills, awaiting new guests," he continues. "What troubles my sleep, even 50 years later, is not just the memory of what we found, but what happened after. 3 of the deputies who entered that cellar with me died within a year, each in different circumstances, each alone at their evening meal. Sheriff Hartley lived longer, but increasingly claimed to hear dinner conversations through the pipes of his home, though he lived alone. Before his death in 1927, he confided that he sometimes saw the Holloways seated at his table when he returned home at dusk, though they vanished when directly addressed." Hendricks concludes, "May God forgive me for what we should have found sooner, for those we could have saved, had we not dismissed the concerns as mere gossip. Even now, 50 years later, I still decline all dinner invitations. I eat standing, never at table. Some invitations, once accepted, extend beyond the meal itself. Some hosts never release their guests. And sometimes, in the quiet of evening, I still hear Martha Holloway's voice calling that supper is ready. Most disturbing of all, I sometimes find myself wanting to answer that call, to take my place at that table below the earth." The hunger she cultivated lives on somehow, not just in those who were served, but in those who merely glimpsed the feast. The Holloway case remains officially closed, the record sealed by court order until 2043. What actually transpired in that farmhouse during the summer of 1893, what purpose drove the couple to lure travelers to their remote table, may never be fully understood. Perhaps that ultimately is a mercy. In 1956, an elderly resident of Hawk Point, Emma Wilson, granddaughter of the Holloway's neighbors, provided a recorded interview to the Missouri Historical Society. In it, she recounted stories told by her grandfather, Jeremiah. Most aligned with known records, but she added one detail absent from official documentation. Grandfather said that before the Holloways came, stories already circulated about that property. The previous owners, the Mercers, also disappeared suddenly. Before them, a trapper's cabin stood on the site, abandoned after the owner reported strange appetites developing during the winter of 1832. The beast land itself seems to cultivate unusual hungers in those who dwell there too long. Wilson's interview includes a description of a local ritual abandoned by the 1920s. "When I was a girl, the old-timers would never seat 13 at a table. If 13 gathered for a meal, they would set a 14th place with the finest silver and china available. This empty place setting was called the Holloway seat and was said to prevent the missing guest from claiming one of those present instead. By morning, food from this plate would always be gone, though no one would admit to taking it. The Holloway property has been subject to modern investigation only once since Peterson's expedition. In 1968, following a series of unexplained disappearances along hiking trails in the region, the FBI briefly investigated potential connections to the historical case. Their findings remain classified, though internal memos obtained through Freedom of Information requests mention acoustic anomalies consistent with previous reports and evidence of continued occupation of subsurface structures despite containment efforts. Most telling is a handwritten note found paper-clipped to the file, reportedly written by the lead investigator before the case was abruptly reassigned. Something still lives in that hollow. Not the Holloways themselves, they're long dead. But whatever hunger drove them continues. It speaks through the old pipes, it sets places at an eternal table, it invites new guests. Most disturbing is the evidence suggesting it's growing. The table our team found had settings for 24, not the 14 documented in 1968. The guest list appears to be expanding. Local historian Robert Jenkins, in his 1969 book, Forgotten Crimes of the Ozarks, suggests the Holloway case represents more than simple murder. What emerges from the fragmentary evidence is the suggestion of a ritual purpose behind the killings. The Holloways appear to have believed they were creating some form of eternal gathering, a perpetual supper with themselves as hosts. Martha's asylum records consistently mention the guests below, as though she believed the victims maintained some form of consciousness. The physical modifications to the property, speaking tubes, specialized preparation areas, the eternal table setting, suggest they were preparing not just bodies, but souls for some twisted form of communion. Jenkins further notes that local folklore around dinner invitations predates the Holloways, suggesting the couple may have tapped into older traditions or beliefs associated with the land itself. Archaeological evidence indicates the cave system beneath the property contains pre-Columbian artifacts, suggesting long human use before European settlement. Among these findings are what appear to be specialized preparation tables carved from stone and elaborate ceremonial dining implements dating to approximately 900 CE. The Missouri Department of Conservation, ranger station nearest the former Holloway property, maintains a curious protocol not found at other locations. A laminated card at the ranger desk, photographed by a visitor in 1966, reads all reports of cooking smells, dinner bells, or invitations to dine from unidentified individuals should be logged immediately and reported to headquarters. Under no circumstances should rangers investigate such reports alone or after 5 RPM. Visitors reporting such experiences should be encouraged to leave the area before dusk. The most compelling evidence that something remains unresolved comes from audio recordings made by University of Missouri folklore students in 1969, setting up remote equipment at the perimeter of the restricted area. They captured what sound analysis experts described as multiple overlapping conversations at mealtime volumes emanating from the supposedly abandoned property. Most disturbing was a woman's voice, clearly audible above the others, stating, "We've set a place for each of you. No one leaves the table hungry." The location of these recordings is now under 20 feet of water, as the construction of the Lake of the Ozarks reservoir in the early 1970s deliberately flooded the lowest portions of the former Holloway property. According to Army Corps of Engineers documentation, this decision was made despite the area not being necessary for the reservoir's capacity requirements. Internal memos suggest the flooding was specifically intended to permanently seal access to the cave system and all structures therein. Lake Patrol officers report that the area directly above the submerged property remains unusually cold year-round, with sonar equipment revealing unexpected density variations beneath the lake bed. Most curious are reports from fishermen describing what sounds like a dinner bell ringing from beneath the water at precisely 6 p.m. each evening. Those who have anchored in this location overnight universally report disturbing dreams of elaborate feast tables set in underwater chambers. In 1974, a scuba diving expedition to examine the submerged ruins was officially canceled due to equipment malfunctions, though off-the-record accounts from team members suggest they found evidence of continued activity despite the flooding. One diver, speaking anonymously to the Kansas City Star in 1977, claimed to have seen a fully set dining table with places for at least 30 individuals. The chairs occupied by figures too indistinct to identify clearly, but apparently engaged in an animated meal despite being fully submerged. Most disturbing was the empty chair at the head of the table, which seemed to be waiting for someone specific. The most recent connection to the Holloway case emerged in 2007, when renovations to the Missouri State Archives revealed a previously sealed collection of papers belonging to Governor William Stone, who held office from 1893 to 1897, coinciding with the Holloway incidents. Among these papers was a personal journal in which Stone recorded a disturbing dream that reportedly plagued him throughout his final years in office. Again last night, the dream returned. I find myself on a rough road through the Ozarks, night falling rapidly. A farmhouse appears, lights welcoming in the windows. A woman calls from the porch that supper is waiting. Inside, a table set for dozens, though only 2 chairs are occupied. A gaunt man and hollow-cheeked woman who introduce themselves as the Holloways. They explain they've been expecting me, that my place has been waiting for years. The cellar door stands open, revealing not a root cellar, but a vast dining hall extending impossibly beneath the earth, filled with a table that seems to stretch for miles. Seated along it are faces I recognize, the missing travelers, yes, but also every person who has died during my administration. They eat endlessly, passing dishes that never empty, engaged in conversations that never conclude. They appear both tortured and ecstatic. Martha Holloway leans close and whispers, "Governance is a form of hospitality, Governor. You've hosted the state at your table of policy and law. Eventually, all hosts must become guests." She gestures to an empty chair beside her, larger than the others, with my name carved into the back. Your place is ready whenever you choose to accept the invitation. Governor Stone died in 1901, reportedly during an evening meal at his home. The coroner recorded the cause as natural apoplexy, but private correspondence between family members describes him rising suddenly from the table, claiming to hear someone calling his name before collapsing. His final words, according to his wife's letter to her sister, were, "They're calling me to supper below," for in the dark hollows of the Ozarks, where modern lights still don't quite reach, locals say that if you listen carefully on quiet evenings, you might hear the distant ring of a dinner bell and a woman's gentle voice calling unknown guests to supper, a supper from which, history suggests, no one ever returned. Park rangers who patrol the lake above the former Holloway property report that each year, despite posted warnings and restricted access designations, several hikers or boaters go missing in the vicinity. In each case, witnesses report the missing individuals mentioned hearing what sounded like dinner conversations or a woman calling about supper being ready. Search efforts inevitably find no trace, though sonar occasionally detects what technicians describe as structural anomalies beneath the lakebed, formations that apparently shift position between scans as though the submerged architecture refuses to remain static. Most unsettling are the place settings occasionally found on the shoreline nearest the submerged property. Antique plates, tarnished silver, glasses filled with clear liquid, arranged as though waiting for guests, the chairs always facing toward the water. Park authorities remove these items when discovered, but employees report they often reappear the following evening, sometimes with evidence suggesting recent use. The final note in the sealed Holloway case file, added by an unknown hand sometime in the 1970s, reads simply, "The table grows, the guests remain. The feast continues, the invitation stands eternal." We have all been expected, perhaps it is best, when traveling the back roads of the Ozarks, to bring your own provisions and politely decline any invitation to dine with strangers, no matter how welcoming the table may appear. For in this particular hollow of Missouri, supper is always being served, and somewhere beneath the dark waters and deeper earth, Martha Holloway is still setting places for guests who have yet to arrive. The hunger that began in 1893 appears to remain unsatisfied. The table waits, and in the depths beneath the Ozarks, the dinner conversation continues unabated, punctuated occasionally by the sound of a woman's voice asking, "Won't you join us for supper? Your place has been waiting."